Brain with orbits. All right, we're going to start with some standard brain sequences. It's everything you've already done before, so none of this is new. All right, so the first sequence is a localizer. I'm going to save the prescription, talk to my patient. This first scan's about 25 seconds long. Hold perfectly still for me, please. Scan. Take a break. For some reason the auto view is off. Nice. Alright, so I'm watching. The scout view looks like something I can work with. Go on to the next sequence, which is calibration. Perfectly easy. Click right in the middle of the window. Done deal. This next scan is about 30 seconds. Hold very still, please. Alright. No break. Go on to the Sagittal T1. Move my graphics palette out of the way, the toolbar. Fix the window level so that I can see the anatomy. Make sure I can see the falx here. I can see the falx. It's a sagittal, so I'm going to throw down in the coronal. Just click right in the middle of that brain. And then once I've done that, I just want to make sure that my lines are going the correct way, which they are, and that I am scanning, in fact, a sagittal, which I am. So now I'm going to angle in 3 planes. This first angulation is good. Come over here, make this a little bit more contrasty. If I can't really appreciate the falx that well, I can, move these, find a slice where I can really see that anatomy, and then I just basically line up with it. Something like that. And this one, I can't see the exterior box, so I'm gonna hit subtract. I don't really have to angle at all, so I'm pretty happy so far. So now that I've angled, I'm going to do the centering. Well, you just go into the sagittal plane and you stick this crosshair right in the middle. This is the egg, or the oval. I'm going to stick that right in the middle, just like that. Now that I've done that, the last thing I have to do is coverage. So I go back to the coronal and I add a couple of slices and I center it up nicely like that. So that looks all good. Check my slices, 256, 192. This is already at 1 second, so I'm not going to adjust the next. I'm just going to leave, or 1 minute. I'm just going to leave it at 1 minute. Check my TR. I have a choice of 412. Basically either of these will work. So it just doesn't matter. Pick whichever one you want. So it's already short. So even though it says 2 necks here, it's less than a minute. So we're going to leave that alone. And save. Josh, you doing okay? Yep. All right, this next scan's about 1 minute long. Hold very still for me, please. Hit scan. This next one is a Coronal T2. Set up. Boom. Window these a little bit. Cool. All right, because it's a coronal, I'm going to throw down in the sagittal plane. Just click right in the middle. Isn't that lovely? All right, so now that I've done that, again, I check to make sure that this is a coronal, and it is. I also want to check the direction is going from anterior to posterior, which it is. So now I get to angle in all 3 planes. So I can go through and see if there's a better sagittal. There isn't. So this is, I'm going to angle like about there. And in the axial plane, I'm going to angle to about there. Something like that. In the coronal, I might give it a little bit of a slight counterclockwise angulation like that. Looks good. Now, as far as centering is concerned, looks pretty good. Again, the midline is right at the base of the anatomy right here. So that looks nice. Everything looks good. Corpus callosum. That's what that is. And so 256, 192. I'm going to go to 1 next. I'm going to pick a TR that's going to work for me, which is that. And then the only thing I have to do is coverage. I already knew the coverage looks good, so we've got coverage from the front to the back of the brain. This is a bit generous. I could probably take a slice off if I wanted to and slide it forward. That I think looks a little better. Okay, so I'm happy with everything. Okay, Josh, this next scan is about 1 minute and 20 seconds. Hold very still for me. Cool. So I'm going to go on to the Axial T2. Now, because I have the sagittal already done, I can load that if I want to. If I feel like it, doesn't take any time. And it does give me a much better look at this angle right here. So, and I can just go ahead and once again I can throw down. Because it's an axial, I'm going to throw down in the sagittal plane. I'm going to angle with the posterior aspect of the brainstem like that. Very good. I'm going to angle here. Oh, I threw down. I just want to make sure that the slices are going the correct way, which they are. All right, and then angle in all 3 planes. And I'm going to center, so I'm just going to make sure that this crosshair is right in the middle of the head, which it is. And I'm going to do coverage. So the coverage on top looks good. I can really see the base of the skull here, so if I want to pull off a slice, I know that this slice is going to go through the foramen magnum, and you're going to have one just slightly below the foramen magnum, so we're all good. I'm going to revise this angle. I'm going to give it just a little bit more of a kick that way. That looks nice. All right. Now that I've done that, 256, 192 maybe, and we're already at 1 next. It's an Axial T2. Let's see if we can optimize this to that. Ooh, that's really fast. All right, well, we'll go with it. All right, so that's 30 seconds. That's really fast. Boom. Next one is, again, it's another axial. It's not a thin. All right, this next scan is about 45 seconds long. So we can copy it, right? So I come over here. You can either copy it directly like this, or you can link it. So if I don't, I can do this. So this copied directly off the last scan, which is fine. Or if I feel like it, I can just select this one here, select this one, right click, create an edit link. I can click that, hit accept, and it does exactly the same thing. Either way, I prefer to just copy them, but if you want to link them, you certainly can. So now that I've linked them, I can come here and 256, 192, let's go for 1 next, and then I just find a TR that works for me. 453 works just fine, perfect. All right, so that's all just regular brain stuff. You guys have all done that many times. So now we're going to go on and we're going to do the orbit sequences. Orbits are a little different because you're not actually using the brain anatomy. You're not using the falx anymore to line up. You're actually using the orbits themselves. So, because they're not, like with the pituitary, you still use the brain to line up your angulation, but because the pituitary just hangs off the brain, but this is kind of a structure that's much further away. All right, this is another minute scan. You're doing a great job. So since I have a sagittal, I can go ahead and load the sagittal in here. So I've got a much higher resolution scan to work with. What else have I scanned? Well, I've scanned a coronal. So, but I don't really need to load it because I'm actually prescribing a coronal. But I do have this Axial T2, so I can go ahead and load that as well. So I'm going to load the Axial T2 in there as well. So I've got 2 high-res scans. All right. So what I want to do is I want to find a coronal sequence or an axial sequence where you can see the orbits. These are the orbits here, here. These are the optic nerves here and here. And then you also have the anatomy where you have what's called the optic chiasm, which sits in this area right here. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm prescribing a coronal, I'm going to throw down in the sagittal plane. It gives me a shim volume, which I can just basically stick in the anterior of the skull, like the forward half of the skull. This is the area that we're scanning, and I can get rid of it because I hate looking at it. Now that I've thrown down, I want to make sure that I check that I'm scanning the correct plane, which I am. This is a coronal, but unfortunately it's going the wrong way. It's going from posterior to anterior, so I have to hit R to correct that. Okay, that's a trick. You got to remember to do that. Next thing I want to do is, this is pretty much, because this is a mid-sagittal, this is pretty much centered approximately in the middle of the, but I'm going to scroll this to the edge of the, where I can see the orbit, like this. This is what the orbit here, and you have essentially bright signal, this, which is the fat, and you have three bands. You have this band here, you have this band here, and you have this band here. The top band is the superior rectus muscle. The bottom band is the inferior rectus muscle. The rectus muscle is the muscle that allows you to turn your eyeball and look at different things. The middle one is the optic nerve. So this little guy right there, coming out there, is the optic nerve. So I'm going to throw this and I'm going to drag this down right over the optic nerve like that. Then I'm going to scroll back to the middle of the head, if I can find the middle of the head. And you're going to look for essentially this little divot right here. Do you see where the pons comes out and it creates almost like a little divot? That's the area approximately of where the optic nerve originates from. So you're going to want to have this side, this end, go basically into that. It's kind of can be a little hard to see sometimes. Actually, this is the optic nerve coming out right there. So just put that right there, and like that. And then you go back to the edge, the orbit. Make sure that you're, again, right there, right in the middle of the optic nerve, like that. And then go back to the, so the chore is to go back from the mid-sagittal here, looking for where the optic nerve enters the brain, to the orbit itself, to see where it originates in the eyeball, so that you have that exact angulation right there. So now I like this angulation. I'm happy with that. Next angulation I care about is making sure that I'm rotated, you know, in the coronal plane. So what I want to find is, I want to find basically the very edges of the eyeballs, the very anterior, and I want to make sure that this angle is exactly, sits right on those eyeballs, right there and there. Okay, so I'm not angling with the falx anymore. I'm actually angling with the eyeballs, and you're going to find out that skulls are not symmetrical. They're not perfectly formed. Those angles can be quite a bit different. All right, so I've angled in the sagittal plane. I've angled in the axial plane. I'm going to go to the coronal plane and angle this just a little bit, so this is nice and straight, like it. Okay, so now the centering is pretty straightforward. You basically want to center so that you can see the top of the brain here, like that. You pretty much have the orbits in the middle of the image, but you want to make sure that you don't clip the top of the brain. So pretty much like that. And your coverage goes from the front of the eyeballs all the way to, so that you've got a few slices into the pons, like this, right there. So you've covered about half the pons. There, you see the pons there? So that looks good. So I'm happy with that. So now that I've done all my prescribing, I'm going to do the numbers again. 256, 192. Let's go for, normally I'll have you do one next just for speed, but we're going to leave it at 2. I just wanted a little bit more signal for this particular sequence. All right, it's Coronal T2, so 41 or 4200 is a pretty good number. So you save that. Okay, this next scan is about 2 minutes long. Hold very still. Scan that. And last but not least, we're going to do an axial fin through the orbits. Turn down the volume on that. Okay. Same thing as before, we have a sagittal, so I'm going to load the sagittal in. Boom, right there. Now, I'm prescribing an axial, so I'm going to go to the coronal. Do we have a Coronal T2? We have two. We have the thin one that's being scanned right now, but we do also have just a standard brain Coronal T2, so I'm going to load that one in there as well. So I'm going to go in there. I'm going to load this one in there, and I'm very happy. So I'm going to do an axial. Again, if I'm doing an axial, I like to throw down in the sagittal plane, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Boom. And again, we want to make sure that we are scanning an axial, which we are, right? Very much an axial, and that we're going from inferior to superior, which we are. So the only trick in this protocol is that you have to remember in the coronals to switch the direction. So, once again, I'm going to try to match that angle. So I'm going to put either the top or the bottom of this pack so that it goes right over where the optic nerve comes out of the brain. And then I'm going to scroll to the orbit and see where that puts it. Well, we're a bit high, so I'm going to angle it back like this and bring it down just a little bit so that I'm right there. That's the insertion of the optic nerve into the globe of the orbit right there. And I'm going to scroll back to the middle, and I'm pretty darn close. I'm just going to angle it a little bit more. Stick that back in there, and then go back to the edge. So you're basically bouncing back and forth between the edge and the orbit itself until you match that angle between those two pieces of anatomy exactly right. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So you see, it comes out right about there and then plugs into the eyeball right about there. So that's the angle that we want. All right, so once we've done that, we can go, we have to cover the orbit. All right, I like covering from fat to fat. So the orbit is actually packed with a whole bunch of fat. See this? This is all fat right here. That's why when people lose a whole lot of weight, their eyes sink in and they get really gaunt looking. That's because they lose this fat pad right here and the eyeballs sink in. So I like to cover from basically from the top of the fat to the bottom of the fat, you know, so that way you've got all the rectus. If there's anything going on in the orbit, you're going to have it covered. So I'm pretty happy with my coverage here. So I've angled in this plane. I'm going to angle here. Again, I like to use the orbits, so I'm going to scroll to the anterior, very anterior, and I'm just going to make sure that the orbits are symmetrical like that, so that I can bring this down to make sure that, yeah, that looks really nice. All right, I'm happy with that. And then here, let me go ahead and see if I can find a box like that. Make sure these are nice and straight. Now for centering, this protocol means you're not going to be able to include with this field of view, with an 18 centimeter field of view, you're not going to be able to get the whole brain on here. So what I do is I go looking for the orbits right here, and I basically almost, if this is the size of an eyeball, I usually put like about half of an eyeball in front, like about that. You don't want to scan to this. You want to have a little bit of extra space out in front like that, and that's the best you can do. You are going to clip if I scroll back down here, I'm clipping a little bit of the brain back here, but I don't care. You know, I've got as much of the brain as I possibly can, but you don't want to come too close to because you think like, oh, well, I'll have it on here if I do this, but you'll clip it. And you have to have all of the orbit, including the lens on the scan. If you don't, it's repeatable. So there you go. So I've centered in all three planes, or I've angled in all three planes. I've centered. I've got coverage from the top of the fat to the bottom of the fat, and so I'm happy with that. That's how you do this. 256, 192, one necks. Yeah, let's leave it at two necks for this one. But I want you guys to do, and this is a T2, and I guess that's the best I can do, right? 16, one acquisition, 16 seats, 16 riders, and I'm above 2,500, so I'm good there, right? Okay. All right, this next scan is about 1.5 minutes, and you'll be all done. All right.